Far above the earth, a lone bird soared through a sea of clouds. It was a hoopoe, its feathers a striking pattern of dusty orange, black and white. A long, slender beak protruded from its narrow head, crowned by a magnificent crest of feathers that rose like a warrior's headdress. Something small was fastened to one of its legs. The sun burned gold above the clouds, bathing the bird in warm light. Then it folded its wings and descended. The warmth vanished almost immediately. Below the clouds stretched a vast, mist-covered swamp. Dark pools of stagnant water broke through islands of reeds and twisted trees. At its center stood a massive stone castle, isolated from the surrounding land by black water. Long, narrow bridges stretched from its walls like the spokes of a wheel. The hoopoe descended toward the swamp. It flew low now, barely above the surface. The tips of its feathers brushed against the water as it followed one of the bridges toward the castle. Then, a hand burst from beneath the surface. Rotten fingers closed around the bird's neck. With a violent splash, the hoopoe disappeared beneath the water. A voice shouted from the castle wall. "Another hoopoe just got snatched." "Leave it for the guards to collect," someone called back. A guard stood upon one of the narrow bridges, spear in hand. Something moved beneath him. He thrust the spear into the water. Once, twice. The water churned violently. The guard leaned over the edge and drove the spear through the dead hoopoe. He lifted it from the swamp and carried it through the castle gates. He was heading toward the tower. Outside, it stood 12 men. Each wore a gray hooded cloak. Each carried a burning torch. The guard approached, still holding the bird impaled upon his spear. One of the hooded men raised a hand. "Wait here until the ceremony is over." The guard sighed, but obeyed. A massive bell rang somewhere within the castle. The 12 men turned as one. They began walking toward a vast opening in the earth, a pit. One of those men was named Rood, and today was his first day. He walked beside the others until they reached the edge. Then he looked down. 12 narrow staircases spiraled along the walls of the enormous cavern, twisting downward into darkness. Rood leaned forward. He could not see the bottom, but he could hear it. Screaming. Men, women, children. Some begged. Some cried. Others simply screamed until their voices broke. Rood swallowed. The other men showed no reaction. Without speaking, each chose one of the 12 staircases and began descending. Rood remained at the top for another moment. He took a deep breath, then followed. The stone steps were covered in moss. Water trickled down the cavern walls, making every step slick beneath his boots. Rood moved carefully. The screams grew louder the deeper he went. Eventually, he found what he had been sent to retrieve. A heavy iron chain had been fastened to the wall. Rood reached inside his cloak and pulled out a small key. He unlocked the chain, wrapped both hands around it, and immediately began climbing back toward the surface. Then he heard something behind him, a child crying. "Ow!" Rood stopped. "I can't walk!" He turned. "Please, help me." Rood stared into the darkness below. Against his better judgment, he descended. A few steps farther down, he found a child lying across the staircase. One of the child's wrists was shackled to the chain. His foot was twisted at an unnatural angle. Broken, long, tangled hair covered most of his face. Tears ran down his cheeks and dripped onto the wet stone beneath him. Rood's expression softened. "It's all right," he whispered. He crouched beside the child. "I'll carry you." Rood carefully lifted him onto his shoulder. Then something farther down caught his eye. The chain continued into the darkness, and attached to it was a hand. Only a hand. Splintered bone protruded from the torn wrist. Whatever had separated it from its owner had not used a blade. It looked as though something had bitten it off. Rood froze. Slowly, he looked at the child resting against his shoulder. A quiet giggle escaped beneath the boy's tangled hair. Rood felt something pierce his back. The child's fingernails had sunk through his cloak and deep into his flesh. Rood screamed. He grabbed the boy and tried to throw him down. The child's mouth opened, far too wide. Crunch. Rood screamed again. Half of his ear disappeared between the child's teeth. He threw the boy down the staircase. The child tumbled across the stone steps, laughing as he fell. Rood collapsed, one hand pressed against the bloody side of his head. For a moment, he simply stared. He seized the chain and ran. He climbed as fast as his legs could carry him, dragging the chain behind him. Every few steps it tightened. Rood pulled with all his strength. Somewhere below, the child was violently dragged upward, his broken leg bouncing from step to step. The laughter had stopped. Now the child was screaming. Rood did not care. He finally reached the surface and collapsed onto the ground. The guard waiting outside the tower looked at him, then at the blood running down the side of Rood's face. A grin spread across his lips. New guy. Two men hurried over, lifted Rood beneath his arms, and carried him toward one of the small wooden cabins beside the tower. A moment later, another gray-cloaked man emerged from the tower. He looked at the abandoned chain, then at the blood leading into the pit. He sighed, picked up the chain, and took Rood's place. Dong. The bell rang again. 12 gray-cloaked men now stood around the mouth of the cavern, each holding a chain. They began walking. Each headed toward one of the 12 bridges extending beyond the castle walls. Behind them came the prisoners. Men, women, children. All shackled by one hand to the chains. Some looked entirely human. Others did not. One woman had patches of scales growing across her neck. A man dragged a twisted leg behind him, its joints bending more like those of an animal than a human. Another prisoner had no visible mouth. Some were horribly disfigured. Others looked completely ordinary, and among them was the child who had bitten off Rood's ear. Still smiling, the prisoners were led to the ends of the bridges. There, built into the wooden floors, were large hatches. One prisoner was positioned over each. The child looked down through a crack between the wooden boards. Something glimmered beneath him. Spears, dozens of them, protruded from the swamp. Bones rested between them. Human bones, animal bones, and bones that resembled neither. Something large moved beneath the dark surface. The child stopped smiling. Dong! The bell rang for the third time. The hatches opened. The prisoners fell. Screams filled the swamp. Some were impaled instantly upon the spears. Others were not. One man's body struck the spikes and collapsed into water. His clothes fell empty into the swamp. A woman burst into flames before she even reached the surface. Her scream lasted only seconds. When the fire vanished, nothing remained of her except a black, stone-like heart. It fell into the water with a quiet splash. Others survived the fall. Barely. They writhed upon the spears, crying for help as blood spread across the surface. Then the water began to move. Human-like creatures emerged from beneath it. Pale hands grabbed the wounded. Teeth tore through flesh. The swamp erupted into a frenzy. Bodies were pulled apart. Bones snapped. The screams grew weaker, then fewer, until finally, silence. Blood drifted through the black water. The waves slowly settled. One by one, the gray-cloaked men turned away. The ceremony was over. They returned inside the castle walls. The guard carrying the dead hoopoe was finally allowed into the tower. He stepped inside and looked up. His expression immediately fell. Stairs. Far too many stairs. He began climbing. By the time he reached the top, his breathing was heavy and sweat covered his forehead. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath, then knocked on the door. A man's voice answered from within. "Come in." The guard opened the door. Inside stood a man with black hair and ocean blue eyes. He was staring through a tall window overlooking the swamp. Nearby sat an elderly woman. Her thin hands rested upon her lap. Her cloudy eyes wandered aimlessly around the chamber, as though she understood only fragments of the world surrounding her. "A hoopoe arrived for you, my lord." The dark-haired man turned. "Mother?" The old woman looked toward him. "Would you be kind enough to read the message for me?" Her face brightened slightly. "Certainly, my son. The guard handed her the dead bird. She examined it for a moment, then noticed the small container fastened to its leg. She removed it. Without another glance, she tossed the carcass back to the guard. He barely caught it. The old woman opened the container and removed a tiny folded letter. She unfolded it. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. It says, she squinted. It just says, the man waited. The old woman looked up. Triads. For the first time, the man's expression changed. A slow smile spread across his face. Finally. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to see the next part.